Okay, what is Max? Max for Live. Uh, those Max and Max for Live, I'm going to kind of use interchangeably here. Okay, so when I say Max, we're talking about Max for Live. Let's take a look. Okay, so at its core, Max is, I like to think of it as a programming language for people who are not very good at programming. That's probably really insulting to a lot of people, so I probably shouldn't say it that way. But if you've seen, if you've looked at any programming language before where you're writing lines of text, okay, you're not going to be doing any of that. Don't worry. So let me show you what it looks like. Here I've loaded in this Max for Live patch onto this MIDI track. This is called Bouncy Notes. What it's going to do is I'm going to play a chord here, and we're going to see the notes, and they're just going to start bouncing, and I can do fun stuff with them. Okay, so watch. Okay, it's kind of neat, right? I've got all these different parameters I can do and whatever. But the thing that makes this one different is I've got different than a normal effect. So I've got this little button right here. I'm going to click on it, and now it's going to launch Max for Live. This is going to let me open this up and do some fun stuff with it. Okay, so let's make this window nice and big. Now I'm going to open it up and just look at the raw code. All right, it doesn't look like there's much here. Cool, but there is a lot more here. Each of these little boxes can be opened up to more stuff. Okay, here's some more complicated stuff. But this is what the code looks like for Max. You've got boxes, and you're connecting boxes to other boxes. Okay, it's not unlike if you are a guitar player and you use a bunch of effects, and you've got, you know, your guitar plugs into your distortion, which plugs into your delay, which plugs into a volume pedal maybe, and then plugs into your amp. It's not unlike that, except take that and like kind of make it times 1,000, because we've got a signal, and then it's running through this box, and then we connect it to that box and that box and that box. So it's just connecting a bunch of boxes, but they get quite complicated and can have different things in them. Where did that one go? Let's go to here. Okay, so each little box you can kind of think of as its own little program. Okay, and we can connect things together to make more complicated things happen. So we can basically do anything as long as we can find an object that'll help us do it. An object is the word for each of these little boxes. Most of the little boxes we're seeing. So sometimes people will say things like, you know, can you launch a rocket ship with Max? And I would say, yes, actually, quite easily. If you give me a rocket ship and have a way to connect it to a computer, I could launch it with Max. There are ways to get crazy data, like the weather in Tokyo, and, you know, have your delay amounts be the dew point of, you know, weather in Tokyo. That's an example I always use, and it's quite doable. So you can really do anything you can imagine. There's people always making more Max objects for us to play with. There's a huge community. So there's always more tools to get. I'll talk to you about that community in just a minute, but that's what Max does in a nutshell. That's what it's all about. So with all of these little boxes, we can connect them and make our own effects and synths and drum machines, sounds, whatever you want. Okay, before we go on to the next section, I just want to say something about learning Max. Max is huge, like huge, huge, huge. I told you before, I've been using Max for like over 15 years, and I am still learning new things about Max all the time. Partly because it updates and there are new things you can do with it, but also partly just because it's just too big to learn. And it's definitely too big to learn in, you know, a 4 or 5 hour class like we're doing here. So, I have a method. What we're going to do is we're going to learn how to learn Max. Okay. So I'm going to show you how to do some stuff in Max. Along the way, I'm going to show you how to find out more things, how to dig deeper. Okay. What that's going to do is make it so that when you have a project in mind, something you want to build, I want you to know how to find the tools that you need. Okay, so everything we do is from that perspective. I'm trying to not only show you how to do something, but how to find out how to do more. Now, I do have a whole bunch of other Max classes that go deeper than what we're able to go into in this single class here. So check those out. There is a 3-class Max sequence that I'm really quite proud of. I'm really happy with how that turned out. So check that out. In this class, we're going to go into the guts of Max. First, we're going to talk about the how to find Max projects, get involved in the Max Maker community. And then we'll go into how to do some programming and build some of your own tools. But again, the goal is for you to learn how to make stuff in a way that you understand how to learn how to do more. Cool? I know it's a weird concept, but just trust me on it. Okay, let's learn a little bit on the history of Max, and then we'll get into what this interface does and what it means. Okay, let's talk about a brief history of Max, where it comes from, and the weird route it took to get here. Why? Why is this relevant to us? Because it's interesting and I like talking about it. So here we go. So there was this guy. His name was Miller Puckett. No. There was this composer. His name is Philippe Manoury. No, that's not a good starting spot either. Let's start with IRCAM. So IRCAM is this, well, first of all, before I dive into this, let me just say that this is the story as I understand it. There may be an official story somewhere. There may be people with more direct experience, but this is everything I know. So there is this place called IRCAM, IRCAM. It still exists. It is in Paris, in the Pompidou Center. And it is a place where a lot of the technology related to music production was birthed. It is basically a computer music think tank. It's a government-funded institution. The acronym IRCAM stands for something in French. I can't remember exactly, but basically Institute for Research in Composition and Electronic Music, something like that. So the way it worked in the early days, and I think it still kind of does, is that they would put together these teams of 3 people. So there would be a composer and a programmer and an engineer. So they would bring in a composer and they would say to the composer, what do you want to do in your wildest dreams? What would you like to be able to make? And the composer would say, I want flying toasters that shoot lasers, and that triggers a glockenspiel, and it plays a melody, whatever. So then the engineer and the programmer would sit around and say, okay, how can we do this? And then they would build the thing required to make that a reality. So at some point, a French composer named Philippe Manoury comes in, and they say, what do you want to be able to do? And Manoury says something like, I want the computer to be able to follow along with the musician, not just have the computer play back a file and have a musician play along to it like karaoke style, which is how everything was done at that point. I probably should have said this is around probably 1985 or 6 that this is happening. So very early days of electronic music. So Monnery said, I don't want the computer to just play some bleeps and bloops and have a live musician play along to that as a duet. I want the computer to listen and respond, adjust its tempo. So the programmer assigned to this task was a guy named Miller Puckett. And the piece that Philippe Monnery ended up writing was a piece called Pluton, which I have a very crude score of here. So what Miller Puckett came up with was a system where basically he would write a program where it would kind of count notes. It would listen for notes and count them and trigger different things to happen at different points. So, but he went one step further. Let's expand our little max patch here. So we have Philippe Monnery and Miller Puckett. Okay. Both at IRCAM. Okay. So Puckett says, well, this is cool, but I'm kind of getting sick of like making something for every composer that comes in here. So I'm going to make something that's kind of modular and I can adapt it to do other things later. So that gives him the idea for a very crude version of Max. What we have here, it's got all these little programs that we can connect together to do things, right? So he initially designed it for Philippe Monnery, but it was designed to be modular so that it could be used for a lot of different ideas and a lot of different pieces of music. So because Puckett was working for IRCAM, it was owned by IRCAM, and it was released to members of IRCAM. You could become a member, and I think you still can, become a member of IRCAM and get releases of some of the projects that they're working on in a thing called the IRCAM Forum. So it was released to members of the IRCAM Forum in 1989. And it really only did MIDI. It could really, like, it could count notes, it could send MIDI messages, and therefore trigger samples and things like that in other devices, but it couldn't do it couldn't do effects, it couldn't do signal processing, anything like that. It was really just MIDI stuff. Okay, so then, also around 1989, a new player enters the picture, a company called Opcode. Well, Opcode was, I believe, a US company, and they were a software maker. They made an early DAW, which I think was called Studio Logic or something like that. So they had a DAW. They eventually bought a license to Max so that they could sell it as a commercial product. So they started selling it and working on it, updating it, making it look better, giving it more functionality. And one of the engineers who was hired to work on that was a guy named David Ziccarelli. So he was an employee of Opcode, tasked with developing this product a little bit more to be a little more sellable. So in the later 90s, at this point, so Max is selling okay. It's not a huge moneymaker because it's very specific and very niche. So Opcode goes out of business. So Opcode goes out of business. Boop. I don't know why I'm connecting those. Whatever. I'm connecting these kind of just for fun. Opcode goes out of business, but David Ziccarelli, being an entrepreneurial dude, buys Max. from the going out of business opcode. And he starts a company called Cycling 74. I don't know why it's called that. We could probably find out, but I don't know why it's called that. So 1999, Zuccarelli starts Cycling 74, and their sole thing is Macs. That's all they do. Now, an interesting thing that I kind of skipped over that I want to jump back to is at some point, Miller Puckett said, you know, this Macs thing that I wrote for Earcam, it was cool, but I could do better. I could remake that whole program in a better way. So he makes a new program called PD. PD supposedly stands for pure data. Some say it stands for public domain because this is free. It's a free version of essentially Macs. It still exists. It's out there. You could get it. However, it doesn't work in live the same way that Macs does, and it's significantly harder to use. It's uglier, but if you want to experiment with something free, try it out. You can download it. So Miller Puckett starts working on PD. Okay, back to Cycling 74. This was about 1996, I think. So Cycling 74 under Zuccarelli starts expanding Macs. And saying, like, the Macs product was cool, but let's add some stuff. Let's add the ability to do signal processing. So they come up with this thing called MSP to add to it. So now the product is called Macs MSP, and it looks like this. So Macs plus MSP is Macs MSP. Cool. And MSP does signal processing, and that means audio stuff. Okay, it can now do audio effects. It can listen to audio. It can generate audio. Synthesis, all kinds of stuff. Now, what does MSP stand for? Well, the person who developed MSP was actually our old friend Miller Puckett. So he's the one who made this, right? So let's see if I can make this a little. How about that? So Miller Puckett made MSP for Cycling 74. So supposedly, no one knows exactly for sure what MSP stands for, but Puckett has said on different occasions one of three different things. Number one, and most likely, is Macs signal processing, the signal processing element to Macs. Number two, the initials of its creator, Miller S. Puckett, possible. And number three, and least likely, but I like it anyway, is the airport code for his hometown, Minneapolis, St. Paul, which happens to also be where I am at the moment. Okay, so that was cool. And then years go by, and eventually the need to develop a set of video tools for Macs arises. And so they create, Cycling 74 creates something called Jitter. So now the name of the program is Macs MSP Jitter. So Macs MSP plus Jitter. And I don't know who the authors of Jitter are. I know one of them was a guy named Jeremy Bernstein. It doesn't matter. There's a lot of people probably. Now, prior to Jitter was written, I think, a little bit in response to a third party, somebody else, made a set of video extensions for Macs. And those were called NATO, I'm not making this up. Oops, these are pluses. 55 3D. NATO, as we commonly say it, was a set of video extensions, and these people were the people behind this were probably the first cyber terrorists, or if not cyber bullies for sure, that we all learned about. It was a very weird time and very strange. I won't go into full details here, but Google this and you'll find like some really fascinating stuff. So Jitter kind of put them out of business. So let's just leave that floating by itself over there. Okay, so that leads us up to about 2015 when we suddenly get Ableton entering the picture. Now, Ableton Company is the company that makes Live, Push, a couple other products. And Ableton partners to create Max for Live, a version of Live that runs within Max. So now Live, Max MSP plus Ableton equals Max for Live, basically. Let's give us a little bit more space because we're almost done. And then that is so successful and works so well that eventually the Ableton company acquires Cycling 74. And now, and I think that was 2015. So now Ableton owns Cycling 74. So let's take all of this and put it down here. Cool. So Ableton is now the owner of Cycling 74. Cycling 74 still kind of operates as its own company as far as I can tell, but it is owned by Ableton as of now. So the two main products, as I've already talked about, are Max for Live and Max MSP Jitter, which is more commonly at this point abbreviated to just Max. And that's the standalone version and the Max for Live version. There are other things. There are a bunch of other things that Cycling 74 makes at this point. Most of them are add-ons or related to Max, but they have a couple special things that are not. And you should check those out. They're all really interesting, but we're going to focus on Max. So that is the long and strange history of how Max and Max for Live came to be.